All right. Okay, guys. So we are live streaming on YouTube. So welcome, guys, to another episode of the Side Talk podcast. So, guys, I am loving this new live streaming to YouTube. I have a guest tonight with me, Guy Arcuri. He is an entrepreneur and an author. And tonight we are going to talk a little bit about toxic parents. So, welcome to the podcast, Guy. I'm so happy to speak to you tonight.
Thanks lots. Thank you.
Yes. So Guy has a PhD. Like I said, he's an entrepreneur, and we're going to talk a little bit about what he does during the day. And he also teaches Spanish. I need to learn Spanish, Guy.
Everybody needs to learn Spanish. Everybody.
Right? So I took it in high school and college and middle school, but for some reason I just couldn't get to that place where I am speaking Spanish, so I really need some lessons.
my comeback to that is always, if that's the case, then you were taught improperly, because we're just designed to learn languages and speak them. We just are. So.
Wow, I love that.
Yeah.
All right. So tell us a little bit about what you do as an entrepreneur outside of your purpose work, which we're going to get into, throughout this interview.
Sure. I don't know if I call myself an entrepreneur. I just call myself eclectic. I had a really high stressed academic life, tenure, publishing and all of that. And I love the teaching component, and my life started to crumble for some reasons. Like I started losing every single person in my family. I had a heart attack, and I just decided it's time to do the things that bring me joy and that help other people without having, ties and burdens of other things around me. So I became a voiceover artist. I love doing that. I have my own voiceover studio. I've been characters. I've read children's books. I've read audiobooks. It's been fun. But I also train foreign language teachers and school administrators. And I dabble in a lot of things. Currently, I'm helping coach budding authors. And it's been really, really a privilege for me to see people struggle with ideas and communicating those ideas, and but helping encourage them that their idea is worth it. All of us have a book in us and that kind of thing. So yeah.
Nice. What do you think makes you really good at working with people and helping them to get out of their own way?
So I think for me, what makes it good is that I have the time. Lots of people just say, I'm busy, but I have the time. My wife works and she makes considerably more than I do. And she is very, very supportive of what I do. And so I have the time to say yes, and help people who really want to, get themselves out there and be more productive, or have a clear message or things like that. So I think for me, it's time.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what you're doing with helping men who have gone through, being raised by toxic mothers specifically, and how you're helping them. So when did you, in your own personal life, realize that you had a toxic mom?
I get asked that question by every interviewer. When we're young, we just think our life is our life and everybody else has the same life when we're really young. But I started realizing that my mother really manipulated us, meaning my brother and sister and I, much more than I was seeing other people and of my friends and peers. And so for me, it was that and the disconnect between her public persona which everybody loved. Everybody loved my mother. Everybody. She loved them, and she was very generous and very friendly. She had a lot of friends, but personally, there was this disconnect. It was a hypocrisy that I thought, wow, I don't want to be that way. I don't want to be two people. And so, but she was actually forcing us to perpetuate the idea that, we had this perfect life, and that in private we don't speak of these things. And so it was just, for me, that was about 13, and it went on and on until I actually left. I left not for good, and not with anger or bitterness, but I just left at age 18 and didn't really return back to my hometown.
Okay. So were both your parents like this, or was it just your mom?
Good question. My father was very passive, and I think part of that was his resignation to my mother's control, and part of it was just that he was a passive man, and he didn't engage in the struggles of honesty and morality and identity that all of us were experiencing growing up, especially with the shenanigans of my mother. So, he was different, but, I learned to love both of them, and I love both of them. I miss both of them, but they were very different.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our parents are our parents. This is my thought process. So I feel like parents are people, right? They're people who have children, and they're people who had a life, and maybe they weren't so good at lifing,
Mm-hmm,
but
mm-hmm.
they had kids, and now they brought these other people into their struggles of dealing with
Yes.
life and being who they are. And some people are able to adjust and really get things together for the sake of these new little people who are depending on you. And some people just can't, you know? So I feel like when they know better, they do better. Some of them never do. And we just have to learn to love them, accept them for who they are, and understand that, they're just people.
Mm-hmm.
People with
Keisha, you need to write a book. That was amazing. That really was. I have this idea in my book that there are these rules to live by, and my mother had a nightmare of a childhood, and I knew that, but I didn't really come up with this idea called rules to live by until I started reading and realizing it's really what I'm reacting to. But we all live with our baggage, and we all live with how we come up, but we all as humans create these rules to live by that we think, if these rules were followed, if I just had this happen, then I would have life, I would be better, my life would be better. If I got this job, if my mother would just be quiet, if whatever it is. And I think we all do that naturally, but toxic to me means that we start imposing those rules on people very inappropriately. And so instead of me saying, people need to listen to me by telling me how great I am, to, you will do this, and if you don't, I'm going to be passive aggressive, or I'm going to be angry, or I'm going to be bully you, or be a queen bee, or whatever it is. And so for me, it's that imposition of these rules to live by, and the idea that we can change those. Like you said, we can create new rules so that we don't drag our little people into that as well. So
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. I definitely believe that. So, how did your mother's behavior show up in your life?
um well, it was, I mean, ultimately it was physical, emotional, psychological abuse. I mean, in its definition case, and but part of it was also me reacting to what she was doing. But she would completely surprise, I mean, even when I was 40 years old, she was physically abusive. When I was trying to help my father, who was getting ready to go into a really big operation on his heart, she was doing something very dangerous to him. And I just said, please stop. And she hit me like hard at 40 years old, and it's like those surprises. So for me, it was always the surprise of that's not what should be typically happening at this point. A reaction to that is not control or manipulation or physical or emotional abuse. It's something else. And so,
Yeah. So, but what I meant with that question, and maybe I didn't ask it right,
okay.
is what she did and how she treated you, that has an effect on, us. Like when we suffer certain traumas, it affects us. So how did the effects of the trauma show up in your life? Yeah.
I understand the question. For me, so my wife and I've always wanted children. I love children, and I got married when I was 20 years old, and we waited to have children until I got my PhD. And then we realized that there were some infertility issues, pretty chronic infertility issues. And it threw it threw us into a real tailspin. And my wife handled it one way, I handled it another. But in counseling for that, I realized that I'm not a very nice person and I'm actually toxic. And I started realizing that I was being toxic to the very people I wanted to love or respect, like, my peers or my superiors or my wife or my friends or whatever. I was just toxic in my definition of the word. And so that's when it clicked. And I said, wow, I've really not handled this well. I need to back up.
Yeah, because that's definitely an effect of suffering traumas, is then internalize these things, and then sometimes you mimic the very same behavior that you hated, or you were like, why is this happening to me?
Right.
So,
And in my book, I describe how these rules to live by get imposed upon you, and then if you don't have a conscious effort to change the tune, to change the rule, you'll become toxic yourself, but not necessarily in the same way. I mean, a good example is my mother was super demanding that we respect her, but she was not very fair with telling us when we were and when we weren't. And we'd get punished way too much for the crime committed. And I kept saying, that's not fair. That's not fair. That's not fair. Well, hers was, you will respect me and I get to call the shots. Mine was, fairness matters and you will be fair to me. And so when my children, for example, would butt into my disputes with my wife, I would rage at them because that's not fair. They're ganging up on me. This is 1-to-1. This isn't 2-to-1. This is 1-to-1. That's not fair. And that's, that's wrong. I mean, I need to welcome input, which is one of the things I say. You need to welcome healthy input, and you need to restore other people to a better relationship with themselves or with you or with others or with God. And so, I wasn't practicing those. I was being a real jerk.
that's well, you know what? At least you realized and you did something about it. So what did you do to correct your behavior and get some help? Was it just therapy? Was it like something else?
So there's a lot of things. We were in marriage counseling, but my therapist really said, you need a little more than that. So I went one-on-one, and then I actually took on a surrogate father to just kind of help me realize that even if my life was not normal, it wasn't the end of the world, or it doesn't have to define me. And he would often say, for example, I met with him every Tuesday for 7 years. He said, I don't need to hear this story, but you need to tell it. And when I told him just the craziness in my life, it took some of the edge off and said, I can survive, I can change, I can be different than this. But it just took me kind of coming to that. And the other thing I did is he and my therapist both encouraged me to really get involved in people's lives in meaningful and helpful ways, as opposed to mean and toxic ways. And so I started a men's retreat every year that I took people to, and I continued doing things like teaching Sunday school and doing things like that. And so
Nice. So what are some examples of toxic parents in your opinion?
I would say they're an example of it's someone, a mother or a parent, who has intense expectations for you, but instead of working through them in a mature way, they wait for you to save them and to come through for them. And when you don't, then you pay. And you pay in some price, whatever that price is. And so for me, it is a person who, in attempting to get others to pay the price of not bringing them the life they feel like they deserve, I think they just do inappropriate things, and you have to, and it's up to you to decide if they're inappropriate for you, and then it's up to you to learn how to respond to them in ways that bring you to health. And so one of the things I do in my book is I don't think men and people in general really know what it means to love someone. And so men especially kind of like formulas. And so I just said, to love someone means to restore them to a better relationship with themselves, or with you, or with others, or with their God. And I just keep driving that point home, that even though your mother or father might be toxic to you, there are always alternatives to restore someone to a better relationship. And those are the things you want to leave behind. And I think a toxic person, just to kind of come full circle, a toxic person leaves a lot of collateral damage behind, usually about which they know nothing. And, it's up to us to kind of decide how much do we want to be that collateral damage and how much do we not.
So what advice would you give to someone who is young, who is in a situation where they're being raised by a toxic parent? Young people, it's very hard for them because they depend on these people to take care of them. But do you have any advice for someone who might be experiencing this?
I love the way you do your job, by the way. You're amazing. So I do have advice. I think for young people, and I wish I had done this. I wish I had read my book when I was 18 and not 30, or written it when I was 56. I think you need to learn how to reflect on your life and reflect on it honestly. And it's hard to do that, especially with men, because we have so many insulating and isolating behaviors and dysfunctional behaviors that keep us from looking, from reflecting on our own life. And then not only to learn the rules to live by that are coming at you, but whether or not they're toxic. Are they really inappropriately being enforced, or are you just sensitive or whatever? And that can come from healthy input from others, like therapists or friends or trusted pastors or whatever. But then ultimately, I think once that's done, you need a goal or a process. And for me, as you recreate new rules to live by, they ought to include virtues that you would like to develop in yourself. So not just to say you have a better rule. For example, I want to be, I want to make sure that I wanted to make sure that I was appropriate with my mother, that I didn't rage at her or get her angry or whatever. But I also wanted to be generous. And so that virtue I wanted to make sure was being cultivated every time I try to respond to her toxic behavior. And when we have those sort of roadmaps of virtue, then, and we get to pick whatever virtue we want to create, we develop our own integrity and our own confidence over time to say, I am a generous person. I'm not a mean person. I don't have to have revenge. These things. And I don't know if men are taught that. They're not taught to look into themselves, and they're not taught that virtue is not a bad thing. It's not a politically incorrect thing. It's a thing that helps us become individuals that love. And that, for me, the ultimate measure of all this is, are you loving well? And do you live a life that lets you know that you are loving well? And there are a lot of ways to do that too. So, and that's a lot to handle cognitively, I think, for a young person who's busy and who doesn't quite have the, development of the brain yet or whatever. So.
Right. And I was talking specifically about even younger people who are like maybe 13, maybe 15, What do you do when you're in a situation where your parents are toxic and you're a young boy? Is there any place they can go? Is there anyone they can talk to? Like, what do you do? Because all of those things that you just said, though, that's great, right? But I think the opposite can happen in some issues where you build up a lot of resentment and anger and hate, and then you start to not be a virtuous and good person, and you start to do things because you're filled with such anger that this is happening to you and you don't understand why. So then you become hardened. So I wanted to know if there was anything that you could offer for someone who is younger, who might just need an outlet or someone to talk to. Or maybe, Guy, if you don't have this on your website, you should put like a little line for the people.
It is a gap. I really believe this. I mean, I think you've exposed a gap only because, we have so few rights as 13-year-olds.
Right.
And I think one thing is that, and this is a back-ended way to answer the question. In working with men, I always challenge them to mentor younger men, no matter what, even if it's like how to, choose restaurants or work in their field or whatever it is, but also to be reflective. And, youth groups can provide that, but again, men may not be ready to help a 13-year-old reflect on their life, to say, you can start now to decide the kind of person you want to become, in spite of the fact that you're being mistreated, in spite of the fact that you're confused. So as a backwards way around that, I would hope that we as men, as we heal, become mentors of men, and no matter how old they are, hopefully younger. But in terms of, I don't know. I don't know what would be age appropriate, to be honest. I'd love to say, oh, I have an answer for you. Here it is.
Right. But we'll have to talk about that offline, Guy. We got to come up with something. But I feel like that is a good answer, like a mentor. So I feel like if you are young and you are experiencing this at home, and you can go to a YMCA or a Boys and Girls Club, and there are people there that are mentoring, get yourself a mentor, because I feel like we have more good than bad, but it can turn bad really quick if something is not, shining the light on the goodness that really is there. So that would be my advice and my hope for, young men who might be going through this. So Guy, you wrote a book, and guys, he's been referencing his book. It's called Toxic Mothers, A Son's Guide to Healing and Moving On. What made you decide that, okay, I'm going to write this book and I'm going to put, my stuff out there? And what will people learn from reading your book?
What made me write the book was that I did a lot of hard work. It was a lot of hard work to be able to say to my mother 7 months before she died, and she asked me, would you be my primary caregiver after all of those abuses? And the fact that she was still in the middle of doing all of that. I had healed enough and worked hard enough to say yes immediately. She lived in Arizona, I in North Carolina. I went every other week for 6 months. And then I, for the last month, lived in Tucson to help her adjust to new norms and, all of that. And to really reconcile with her more than I ever thought. It did bring up some really crazy stuff that I could talk about, but I said yes immediately. So to answer the second half of your question, I think I wrote the book so that men don't have to struggle as much to find a path to healing. And what they'll find in the book is a simple paradigm, a simple structure to take in any and all different kinds of help out there for healing, to learn to love others and to learn to heal and to learn to be loved. And that's what they'll get out of that, whether you are the person needing the healing or you are trying to love the person who needs the healing. You will learn how to do that. And I took a chance sort of marketing it to men, but it really is for everybody to learn how to love well and to love, especially men who might be internally struggling and not really able to break free of that.
So do you know do you know who was the toxic parent in your mother's life?
Oh, my mother's father was so abusive. She was the fourth of 6 siblings. Every one of them left before they were 15 or 16. My mother and every one of them was abused so badly by their father that, they were beaten, they had their bones broken, and my mother, the atrocities, I can't tell you on a public airway. Some of them are in the book. But what was so interesting about that is that she designed rules to live by that were going to protect her children from something like that. And in doing so, she became that. But the thing is, there was a come to Jesus moment, oh hell no moment. I love oh hell no. But I flew her to North Carolina and I insisted that she not bring my father because she kept complaining that it was all her father's fault. And finally I said, Mom, where was your mother when he was rubbing your face in your own urine because you were so scared that he was going to beat you? Where was she? She said, she was right beside us reading a magazine. I'm like, how is it that you can just focus on that and not focus on a sort of even bigger picture that, you've created demands that life go one way because you were neglected by your mother and abused by your father, and all at the same time wondering, where do I fit into all this? So we had a really great moment talking about that. She still insisted that her father was the blunt of all of her trauma and her dysfunction and pain.
Yeah, seems like it was both of them, but
Yeah.
Ay, ay, ay. Okay.
Fun news, yay!
I know. It's just it's just so sad because I know that a lot of people go through this sort of thing. And I love that you're doing this to help men because I think men are the one of the most underserved communities because everyone expects a man to be this strong and militant and no emotion showing being, and it shouldn't be like that. Men are human beings too, and we need them to connect to their softer side. We need them to express emotion, be vulnerable, talk about what hurts them, and heal from whatever traumas that they have suffered
Mhm.
so that they can be great dads, good husbands, and just show up in society in a positive and healthy way.
Amen.
So I love what you're doing, and I feel like it's really important.
What you just described is interesting, is that women are raised to do the things you just said, to be vulnerable, to create support groups, to share vulnerably. All of these things women are raised to do as women. And it's really bled into the typical traditional therapies for healing. But men have that extra obstacle of, well, sure, maybe I need group therapy, but I don't even know how to be in a group and be vulnerable. I can go bowling or I can go shoot at the club, but I don't know how to sit here and say my mother was so abusive to me that, I'm afraid to, do whatever. Those things are hard to do. And so uh, I think we have extra work to do as men. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, Guy has a whole website that is like dedicated to helping men heal from, these traumas. So, tell us a little bit about the programs that you offer and how you are helping men with,
Well,
this situation.
so one of my website is www.guyarcuri.com, and one of the things I have is a blog, and it really goes into depth about the topics that we're talking about. Uh, for example, one I really think we as men need to become aware of how we insulate and isolate ourselves instead of to receive healthy input to grow as people. And so the blog, and then I have a place for you to design your own men's retreat, or you could be invited to one of my retreats, or whatever. But these retreats are just to learn the reflection skills and the sort of process that's defined in the book, so that, and with that process comes a lot of resources in the book that so it's a very well researched book and website for you to find places to heal and create your personalized path to healing. um Forgot what the third thing is. I do three things on the website, but I've forgotten currently what the third one is. uh but you can go on and sign up and take a little survey. It's a fun survey in that you could tell whether or not someone's being toxic to you by reading the scenario. And the interesting thing about that is that all of the scenarios happen to me, and they define set of characteristics of toxic people by just seeing a real life, you know, a real example of that. And so, but when you do that, it'll subscribe you to my website, and then uh, and I also have my book promoted there and things like that. So.
Great. All right. So, Guy, on the Side Talk podcast, I always ask my guests to share an oh hell yes moment. An oh hell yes moment is a moment of clarity or success. So, share with us an oh hell yes moment that you had where you felt very clear about the assignment, or you felt successful.
Yeah. So I thought about this. I didn't know you was going to be oh hell yes. Thought it was going to be oh hell no. So I'm quickly thinking, but I have one. I have one that was very successful and sort of humorous. So my mother, in all of her dysfunction and toxicity, absolutely demanded that no one know she was dying. And so it put such a burden on me to go there every other week. I mean, how many mothers' sons travel across the continent every other week to stay with their mother for a week? But her friends were asking me, and she demanded that no one know. And I had decided this next time going to Arizona, I was going to have a, dang it, I don't know if I can swear on this. Dang it, I'm not going to keep this a secret. It's too hard. And I flew in and we got in, and she had arranged for us to go to this steakhouse with all of her friends. It's a little supper club. And we got there late, but we weren't really late. We were just not as early as everybody else because it was an over 55 community. And we sat down by ourselves because everybody else had already arrived. And she's blind, and we're sitting by ourselves, and she's telling me about all of her friends. And when she got to her friends, she would say, "Oh, and that's Kathy." And she'd say it really loud, and she'd motion Kathy over, and Kathy would come and meet me. And it was really fun. But I still wanted to have that come to Jesus. Like, I'm not going to use this pretense again. And she talked about this gentleman. I won't mention his name publicly. Let's just call him John. So she mentions John, and she said, and that's John. And he heard, and he came up, and he was wearing like a t-shirt with the cut all the way to his belly button and hairy chest and like 8 pounds of silver and gold. And it was like Vinnie Barbarino or, The Godfather or whatever. And here he comes clinking in with all of his sexy. And she goes, "Oh my gosh, Guy, John's coming over here. He's sweet on me." And I'm like, I was so frustrated because I want to meet her friends, but they're dying, blah, blah. And so I just resigned everything and said, "Well, Mom," I whispered in her ear, "if he's sweet on you, he better up his game because he doesn't have much time." And she was terminally ill. And we laughed and laughed and laughed. And he was like, "What are you laughing about?" And I just said, "You wouldn't understand, John, blah, blah." And so it was that, okay, I get it. Even though she's being that toxic about that, I can still live with grace. I can still honor her. I can still be humorous. I wanted to see the humor in all this. And so I just said, you know what? I'm just going to see the humor in this. And from then on, it was very funny when I would get into situations where the people didn't know she was dying, and yet we're having a conversation, and,
Right. If you can't beat them, join them.
Right. That's it. That is exactly it. I said, okay. And so I did. And that for me was a success because I was very set on being relieved of this burden. It was just so hard to keep the pretense. And so finally I just said, you know what? I'm just going to drink it all in and be funny, and I'll be fine. Yeah.
That's a great, Guy. And I love that you helped her, took care of her, and did everything until her last day. And, God's going to bless you for that. So, I mean, it was rough, I'm sure, but you know what? It is what it is. And that was the best that she could do. She just didn't have the capacity to heal and do better. So I'm glad that you took control of your life and you have healed and you're doing better. And that's good because that will be passed down to your children.
again, you should write a book. You just said it. You just spot on. That's it. So
Yeah. I love it. Well, thank you so much, Guy, for coming on the podcast and sharing your story. Please tell us again where we can connect with you and purchase your book.
Well, you can purchase the book on Amazon right now and just search my name, Arcuri, or Toxic Mothers or something like that, and it will come up. And my website is just my name, GuyArcuri.com, and you can opt into it or just surf what I have there, and hopefully it'll help you. And if you need, that's the third thing, is that I actually organize mentors, people who need to be mentored and people who mentor. That I knew there was a third component to my website. I'm like, it's been a long day. So.
No problem, Guy. All right. So let's see.